Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. In today's show, we look at both business and politics. However, it's with a common theme, and that is how people respond to and overcome life's challenges. First, Alex talks to Alfie Best, someone who overcame both prejudice and a lack of regular education to become one of the UK's most successful entrepreneurs. And then into the world of politics, where he first speaks to former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, who lost his seat after 13 years in Parliament. And then to human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, who in one of the dirtiest by-elections of the last century had the prize of a parliamentary seat snatched away. How did they respond to and overcome these challenges? We'll find out on this show. But first, thank you for your tweets, messages and emails. Let's look at a few. Shirley said, I enjoyed the show today in Lanzarote. Well, I hope you're having a good time, Shirley. And congratulations to Angus on his private member's bill. The plight of young refugees is not a new one. A pal's father at 10 walked from Belarus to Hamburg to work his passage to the US. Ren Chapman said, I spoke to a lady in a shop yesterday, very interested in the show. She even got it up on the computer behind her, while I was there to see what all the fuss was all about. Her husband loves the Alex Salmond Show. Big tick. Dan McPhail says, I risked a dose of the Alex Salmond Show. Discussion on Angus Brendan McNeill's refugee bill, amongst other things, of course, and I survived. Well, I'm pleased to hear it. And finally from Benny, who says, another good show, the focus on the private member's bill about child refugees. We've been rather productive in producing refugees, but not so keen in taking responsibility for it. So this would be a small step in the right direction for Angus Brendan McNeill, and so see all of us. All power to Angus's elbow as he takes this bill through Parliament. Now to our first interview on overcoming challenges. Alfie Best's Romany background meant he faced both prejudice and a lack of regular schooling, but he's become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the UK. Just how did he pull that off?
And now I'm delighted to be joined by Alfie Best. Alfie, welcome.
Pleasure's all mine, Alex.
Now, growing up, 1980s, growing up in a Romany gypsy family, what was that like?
Well, for a lot of people looking outside, it was extremely hard. But I've got to be honest with you, for me, it wasn't. People look in and think that we were very, very poor. But to be fair with you, it was a rich life. You lived off the land. You know, I was born on the side of the road in a caravan. But, you know, that I didn't know any different.
Your family's staple, was it macadam and drives and things? Did you go around door to door selling?
Yeah, listen, from an early age of 8 years old, I was cold calling on doors and selling tarmac.
That's a tough school.
Well, the hard knocks of life are the ones that chisel you and make you the person you are.
This sounds a bit like political canvassing. You get just so long to get your pitch across before that door gets shut in your face.
Listen, you have one of the best lessons you can learn in life is learning how to read people, and by canvassing them at the door, instantly you know whether you're getting a good reception or a bad reception, and you have to fine-tune that every time. So you've got 30 seconds before that door closes.
So that was your background, and then was it unusual for a Romany gypsy lad like yourself to become an entrepreneur, or do you think it's a background that breeds entrepreneurship?
You know, with the good grace of God, I've been lucky enough to take it a little bit further than a one-stop business. And certain businesses that I've been involved with have become national businesses. And one particular business that I'm involved with now is Europe's largest residential mobile home park operation.
But then it wasn't all plain sailing for you when you started. But you got into mobile phones, which was your first big breakthrough.
Yeah, well, I did very, very well. I was in the van hire business. And that business was doing great. I actually thought I could walk on water until I was 20 years old, and it was as if somebody not only pulled the rug away, but they set it on fire at the same time. And from there, I then went and got a job in a mobile phone shop, and I begged and pleaded for the job. I was sleeping in my car at the time, so I'd done a whole complete 360 of where I'd virtually come from. And when I got the job there, learnt the business, 6 weeks later, I opened up my own shop. Within 18 months, we had 13 stores. Then what I'd looked to do was I got a mortgage, purchased the freeholds of those shops. So one company owned the shops, the other company was a trading business, and we then sold out to one of the subsidiaries of Vodafone, and we kept the freehold of the properties.
And what did your family think about that success? Did they say, go on, you'll sell Alfie, or did they say, hey, watch yourself, otherwise you'll be sleeping in the car again before you know it?
I come from a very, very supportive family. My mother and father, I couldn't ask for better people. They've had their trials and tribulations and suffered indignities, I believe, but that has made them better people. And I've had the privilege of learning from those, what I would regard hardships for them. And it's, you know, a man has to know where he's from to know where he's going.
And so after you did this great deal on selling the mobile phones, was it then you decided to move into something you also knew a bit about, which was actual homes?
I bought my first mobile home park 16 years ago in Romford, and today we've built that business to 62 residential mobile home parks.
What's your own background, you know, as a travelling family, as a Romany Gypsy family? Was it that background you said, listen, if somebody knows about what people really want in a mobile home park, it must be me?
Who better to buy a caravan from than a gypsy? Yeah. We've lived, breathed and slept, and we know them better than anybody. And I would say now, you know, caravans have moved on. The retirement mobile homes that we sell now are virtually houses.
That's not the only business you're in. You've diversified, both in terms of what you do, but also you're in the States, in Florida now.
Yeah, we have mobile home by 15 parks in Florida. We're looking to expand and grow that business. We also own a company called Best Park Home Finance, which also loans and does finance for people that are looking to buy park homes.
So looking back, you know, back to your boyhood, do you think, which, you know, most people would describe as you came from adversity, because it's not the easiest background to have. Do you think that has been an advantage for you, or do you think that, look, you know, wherever your background had been, your natural entrepreneurial flair would have taken over?
I actually believe it's what's in your heart. If you've got the heart to push forward, if it's in you as a person, from whatever background you're from, you're going to do well. Because remember, we've all got different qualities. Just because somebody is a good manager and they're not a good entrepreneur doesn't make that person wrong. It actually makes them right, because they've found their flair in what they do.
From my own school days, so there was a chap called Mr. Harrison, who's a very successful builder in Linlithgow when I was a lad. And he was a great benefactor of the local school. And every so often at prize giving, he'd come along, he was the richest guy in town, and a very famous guy and a very generous guy. And he'd tell us all to stick it out our studies. But the only problem was he'd left school at 13. And I never quite equated, you know, him leaving school at 13, becoming a multimillionaire, the richest guy in town, a great benefactor to the school, with telling the rest of us to stick in our studies. So what do you say when you go around schools, when you talk to young people? What's your message?
What I would say is this, and this is my message to everybody, is nobody should ever put you down. And it is in you to rise up through whatever ashes that you come from. And I swear this and I mean this openly. I've seen people from all walks of life do well. But it doesn't matter if you're educated, streetwise, or completely unacademic at all. It's up to you to make it happen. And instilling that in our children is going to make them succeed. For instance, I don't believe in saying to a child, you're clever. I actually prefer to say to them, my God, you're trying hard. Because it's the trying that will make you succeed. I'm not particularly a clever person, but what I will do is I'll put 5 hours in where somebody will only put 1.
If I was to ask you to encapsulate the Alfie Best philosophy, for youngsters watching this show who want to be successful in life, what would that philosophy be?
Do what you love what you do, and you'll never work a day in your life.
And if somebody watching this has a young Alfie Best coming to the door to sell them a new driveway, what would your message to that person be?
Always listen.
Alfie Best, Thank you so much for doing the interview. And there's something for you. This is called a quaich, which is Gaelic, Scots Gaelic for a loving cup. And what you do is quite simple. You stick the whiskey, only Scotch obviously, in the quaich, and then you pass it round your friends, only your close friends.
Thank you very much.
Alfie, thank you.
Pleasure's been mine. Thank you very much.
Now we turn to politics. Both of my next guests had to bounce back from grievous political and personal setbacks. Firstly to Lembit Opik. In 2008, a candidate for the Liberal Democrat presidency. By 2010, dumped from his previously safe parliamentary seat in Montgomeryshire. How did he respond? I asked Lembit that very question a few days ago. Lembit Opik, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
And thanks for the introduction.
Well, I want to take you back to that moment. This was the 2010 general election. You'd been an MP for 13 years. You were one of the best known of the Liberal Democrats in the House of Commons. The Liberal Democrats were doing well in that election. You could have no expectation that you were about to lose your own parliamentary seat. Narrowly, of course, but you still lost it. How did you feel that night at the count when you saw things moving against you?
Personally devastated. I'm not going to lie about it. I was 25 to 1 on to hold the seat. I didn't put any money on that because I was so sure I was going to win. And then during the count, it began to look close. And then it became very close. My agent said, I think you might lose. And it's very hard to describe that feeling. It's the almost car crash sense you have in your stomach, that almost go into physical shock. But I had to get through the evening, and I stood on the stage, and my competitor who beat me was so surprised he had no plan. So I had to tell him what to do, and I tried to maintain my decorum at the time. What happened next was I was straight on to the BBC coverage, and Jeremy Paxman asked some fairly snide questions, and I put him right. I lost that fair and square, and so initially I held it together. But after a couple of weeks, it really started taking its toll, and you feel a sense of bereavement and displacement, because as you say, I thought I was heading perhaps even to a ministry position if we were in coalition, and instead I was heading for the Dole office.
And just 2 years previously, you'd been the early favourite in the campaign to be president of your party, so it was a rapid reversal of fortunes. So once you got over the initial shock, what was your approach to getting back on your feet?
You maintain a kind of momentum even after you lose, almost as if you're in denial. You carry on expecting to be called for interviews, and for a while you are, because it was a curiosity. I was the scalp that people wanted to talk about. Michael Portello can talk about that same experience. And then they lose
This
interest.
is something not unknown to myself.
Of course, yeah. I didn't want to comment, but you know that feeling yourself, and you're a curiosity. You're a talking point, to some extent, the object of humour. I was on Have I Got News for You the morning after I'd lost. They'd booked me beforehand, expected me to pull out, but of course that was the subject of humour. You laugh at the time, but you're not laughing inside. And over time, I lost that momentum and I lost direction. If you like, I lost my narrative. I had been an MP, I expected to be an MP, and now it was nothing. And I had no role civically in my area. I looked out the window and thought, what do I do next?
People watching might not understand this. I mean, an election is an exhausting process, a constituency election during a general election. And the adrenaline which has carried you through the election, of course, is spent. So even when you win an election, I mean, I won 9 in a row, you still feel the day or two after the election like exhausted. And I always wonder what it would be to have that feeling and to have lost. So that is it's a kind of double hit, is it not?
It is. At a personal level, it's really difficult. It's personally embarrassing. I'm not going to lie, it's embarrassing. Because you have to walk down streets and you know that over half the people didn't vote for you. And there's a second part, which is humiliating. You have to face the staff, all of whom are going to lose their jobs because you were responsible for employing them in the constituency and in Parliament. And you have to say, I'm sorry. There's no point in blaming anyone else. It's your shift, and you take the rap, whether you feel that it's really fair or not. There were 3 reasons I lost, and one of them was my responsibility, so you have to do that. They've all got to find new jobs. You've got to shut down your office within 5 days. The Parliament isn't kind about that. They want you out so that the new person can be in there. And there's no
This is your office in Westminster?
In Westminster, yeah. You have to get your stuff out very quickly, and they really push you, and I understand why. And after that, it gets quiet. And you start asking yourself, well, first of all, what am I for? What am I meant to do? And secondly, how did I end up here? And it's from hero to zero. And eventually my finances dried up. Used to get a pretty good settlement when you lost like that. And the money had gone. I still had the same debts, couldn't get rid of the mortgages. And then I became insolvent. So it went down and down and down. And it just felt to me that there was nothing I could do to get work.
You probably had almost the worst period in that circumstance. You were 13 years as an MP, which meant it very difficult to pick up your previous career and very difficult to move out of politics, after taking that particular drug over a prolonged period of time.
You know how addictive it is to go into Parliament, to be part of an institution which kind of looks after you, and you've got your friends and you've got a rhythm which is very demanding, maybe 90, 100 hours a week in my case, but it's predictable. And it's all gone, literally, overnight, in 5 minutes, if you like, from the point of the announcement to the point of you accepting the defeat. I found that transition hard. Luckily, I had been in the private sector for about a decade beforehand. I'd done work in human resources and marketing, so I had options, but I couldn't see those options. But more to the point, other people saw me as the failed MP, not as a potential employee. I wasn't even getting to interview stage.
So why didn't you decide, look, the best way to do this is to cut my ties with politics, not necessarily resign from the Liberal Democrats, but just say, look, my political career is at least suspended for now. But you, in terms of trying to separate you from the politics and then, was even that difficult? Did you consider that, or was it the ties to the Liberal Democrats too strong?
I tried to maintain a relationship. I kept going to Lib Dem events, but it didn't feel right. I was criticised by Lib Dem members and other people very senior in the party for having screwed up my constituency. Exactly for the reason you said. It all looked so promising. In reality, it wasn't quite so rosy for the Lib Dems, but that's not what
the Lib Dems lost seats, of course. They gained votes, but they lost 5 seats.
They did, but all of us, I know that the others who were in the same situation, and we were all regarded as the ones who'd got it wrong. Not the party, but ourselves. And I got some stick for that. You lost a safe seat for the Lib Dems, and it had been a safe seat for much of the last century. So you're dealing with that, and eventually I wouldn't say that I cut my ties with the Lib Dems. It just became too painful. And I was willing to do work. I went around, helped with by-elections and so on. But I threw in the towel because it was utterly pointless and personally corrosive, because every time I did it, it reminded me that I'd lost. And over the course of 2 years, from 2010 to 2012, I would say I got to my lowest ebb possibly in my life. Didn't have any income, couldn't pay my bills, had the repossession people coming over from the bank telling me about how they were going to take my house away, and no idea how I was going to turn that round.
So how did you?
It was involving a conversation with Steve Chalk. He runs a church, very avant-garde church, if you like. He could see I was drifting. It's a Baptist church, technically, but he's really almost a humanist. And I remember that Wednesday night, and he said, find your narrative and you'll be all right. And literally that evening, I recognised it. I talked to my then partner about it, and I started thinking. It still took a year and a half for me to begin to put that into place. But I remember that night was the change. Now, it could have gone another way. If I hadn't had that direction, if I wasn't willing to start fighting back, I could have just ended up in the gutter.
And tell us about that narrative that you searched out.
Well, what I searched out was a realisation that I'd never really intended to be an MP. It was something I did, but it wasn't who I was. For me, it's empowerment. I suppose I would summarise it, and I've thought about it a lot. I want to help people be the best they can be, including myself. And I was discounting my own welfare to zero, just trying to help other people. I wrecked relationships because I was so obsessed with being an MP and serving people I didn't know so well. And then it began to change. And gently, I found things which worked. So I got involved with a group called the Motorcycle Action Group. That was my first proper job. It was, and still is, something I do because I believe in motorcycle rights, people's freedom. And they welcomed me. They weren't judging me the way I'd felt judged for so many years. And so now I had an income and I was declining financially at a lower rate, beginning to turn things around. Then I got a little bit of broadcasting and I realised I was good at that. And all of it was about that narrative, about helping people be the best they can be, whether they're on my programme or they just want to have a go at me. That didn't matter to me. But I'm not going to lie again. It took probably 5 years for me to settle from 2010 to 2015.
Just A couple of last questions. Did the Commons authorities ever sort of contact you, either to say, how are you getting on, or alternatively to say, listen, we've got a seminar for people who lost their seats just to check up on the welfare of past MPs and would like you to contribute to it. Was there any contact of that kind, sort of welfare contact?
There was an economic welfare contact because I always found the staff there who I've respected, and I think they were unfairly attacked with expenses and so on. They had a different role, and I won't go into that now. But they were really considerate. They wanted me to get the package I was entitled to, and there was a lot of money at the time. Without that, I would have become a bankrupt and I would have lost my house. In terms of aftercare, there isn't much. They don't say, you're an MP who's lost your seat. We understand that's very traumatic. Partly because that's not what the public think. The public are not sympathetic to failed politicians or politicians who've lost their seat. And I think it would have probably caused some heat in Parliament if there'd been all this money to help. But you know what? It should be there. Because at the time, I didn't have a family. I was not obliged to pay people's schooling and everything else. But if you've got 2 children and you've got a mortgage and you've got a wife who says, what do we do now? There's not much of an answer apart from when the money runs out. I'm not sure, love, we may have to sell our house. So in that sense, Parliament is understandably cautious, but it's not a kind place to lose your seat.
So what's next for Lembit OPIC?
I think the narrative that I started developing in 2012 was really discovering what I've always been meant to do, including in Parliament, and that's empowering other people. I love doing broadcasting, as do you, and if you do it right, it's not a mean activity. You can help people shine and put their often controversial views forward. I've never really been aggressive enough to be in the top flight alpha male class in Parliament, but I don't need to be like that now. If I go home at night and think I made the world a little bit better or a little bit more informed than it was yesterday, and if I can pay my bills, let's be honest, then it's been a good day.
Lembit OPIC, it wouldn't help pay the bills, but nonetheless, for appearing in the Alex Salmond Show, you're entitled to the quaich.
I've always wanted one of these.
Well, you're
Thank
getting
you.
one. You know the drill. Get the whiskey and the quaich, pass it around your close friends. Only Scotch whiskey, of course.
That is fantastic. I'll get value tonight.
Lembit OPIC, thank you very much indeed.
much.
Thank you. Now for our second political interview. Peter Tatchell was denied victory in the Bermondsey by-election in what was one of the filthiest electoral contests of the 20th century. How did he reinvent himself as an international human rights and LGBT activist? I spoke to Peter recently. Peter Tatchell, when you were selected as the candidate, the Labour candidate, in one of the safest Labour seats in the country in 1981, you must have thought that you'd be able to take your political campaigning to the floor of the House of Commons.
I certainly did, and the defeat in 1983 was quite a blow. It wasn't until I actually wrote my book, The Battle for Bermondsey, about the by-election, that the full scale of what happened dawned on me, because I'd been physically and violently assaulted when out canvassing on the doorsteps. There were 2 attempts to run me down in a car. There were bricks thrown through my windows. There was an arson attempt on my flat. I had nearly all the teeth in my mouth chipped and cracked as a result of violent assaults during that campaign and the run-up.
There was 2, effectively, campaigns against you. One was that you were seen as a far-left politician, which you could say was a legitimate part of campaigning. Whether it's true or not, it's another matter.
Except all the far-left policies I stood on are now the official policies of this country. I said we need a negotiated settlement in Northern Ireland, and that's what happened. I said a national minimum wage, which they said was extremist. It's now a reality.
Well, I sometimes have the same thoughts myself, Peter, but these things are, to a certain extent, bruising but legitimate. But what I think people at 35 years distance, people watching, many people weren't alive 35 years ago, they would find incredible is the extent to which the homophobia in the campaign was openly declared. I mean, there was a real Labour candidate who, as I remember, went about with a campaign song on Tatchell as a puppet, I think was the word used. How did you endure that sort of campaigning, that sort of gutter level of campaigning?
In those days, the level of public homophobia was much greater than today. And so, there wasn't the same public understanding and acceptance of gay people. And the hope was that eventually I might get through. But in the end, the welter of negative stuff was just completely overwhelming.
has there been any moment over these last 35 years where you look back in the Bermondsey by-election and say, well, maybe it wasn't such a bad thing, not the disgusting nature of the campaign itself, but what the actual outcome in terms of it gave you more freedom to pursue the campaigns you've pursued?
Yeah, sometimes I think, you know, if I had won that by-election and ended up in Parliament, I probably would have ended up as a rather ineffectual backbench MP. I used to say, like Jeremy Corbyn, but now, of course, he's the opposition leader, the leader of the Labour Party, and probably on course to become the next Prime Minister. So, you know, fate has some curious twists.
Now, you've occasionally been tempted back into elections, but haven't fully got, I mean, with the Green Party on one occasion, I remember. Yeah. But you haven't gone through with that. Was that second thoughts for any particular reason?
Well, no, it's really primarily been as a result of all these campaigns I've done. I've been beaten up so many times, and particularly the beating by Robert Mugabe's bodyguards in Brussels and by neo-Nazis in Moscow in 2007. It has left me with some brain and eye damage. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I think if I was an MP, I could probably do the constituency work very well, or the parliamentary work, but I think to do both would be quite a struggle. And I'm saying that because I like to give 100%, and I wouldn't want to do something if I didn't feel that I could do 100% and really do the best possible job. So it was really considering that those injuries and the consequences that maybe decide to not pursue that further.
Peter Tatchell, thank you for giving me 100% today.
Thank you. Cheers.
Today we've met three very different people, but with one common theme. Every single one of us undergoes challenges in life. Sometimes it's deserved, sometimes not, and sometimes a mixture of the two. How we are defined, however, lies in how we respond. Alfie Best has soared beyond his early disadvantage in life to underline how his Romany background has proved an advantage in his success. Lembit Opek had the glittering prizes of politics snatched away and has now rebuilt his career as a commentator. Peter Tatchell says he is more fulfilled as a human rights campaigner than he would have been as a backbench parliamentarian. In their own separate ways, they provide both an example and an inspiration, and they deserve both our recognition and respect. From Tasmina and me and all at the show, goodbye for now.